Um, it seems that this is a good time for us to start. We have quite a few people that have joined. Thank you everybody for joining us. At any point, we thought, Grant and I, we thought that if you have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand or just send us a chat. We'll make sure to address the questions throughout the presentation. We're also going to have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we can definitely address them yet. But as we're doing, Grant is actually going to give us a walkthrough of the application. So if you have any questions during that time, like definitely feel free to hit us up, and we'll make sure to go over them. So I think this is a great time. We can start. I want to thank you all. Feel free to turn on your videos. It's always nice to put a face on the names. And I know some of you, I know you personally, so thank you for joining and supporting, and for wanting to learn more about what we can do as rental housing providers. Thank you, Grant, for agreeing to do this with us. I think it's a little bit of background. I've known about the Landlord Credit Bureau for a little while, and I actually have it as part of my leases, the appendices to my leases, and I thought it was a great tool. I have to be honest, I'm lucky, my tenants are great, but that's also another way to use the tool to help and to support our tenants, because we know that we also want to be good to them. So definitely, this is a win-win situation for everybody, and this is really um, what I strive as a real estate investor, and through my company, Rethink Investments. We want to create win-win situations for whether it's an investor or it's a tenant. Is definitely something we want to make sure that we work on. So, like I said, it's the Landlord Credit Bureau. In my own personal opinion, I found that it had like really great offers for both, but I realized that not many people knew about it. And if you know me from social media, you know that I'm always sending a message. Have you checked the Landlord Credit Bureau? If anybody has any issues with tenants, it's like, have you checked it? Even to the tenants groups as well, when they will, they had the issue that they cannot prove that they pay the rent every month, and they have no way of really showing it. And my comment was always as well, have you checked the Landlord Credit Bureau? Because that works for them in that sense too. So with all of this, we thought, you know what, let's try to reach a broader audience. Let's try to really educate ourselves about how we can use this tool and how it benefits all of us, both landlords and tenants. And let's make sure that, and that's basically our goal today, to make sure that you guys learn the tools that we have available and how we can use them. So there's quite a bit of other people in the waiting room. Grant, is it okay if we wait a couple of minutes? People
Yeah,
are
of
still
course.
joining. So I kind of jumped straight into what today is going to be about. So while the rest of the people can keep joining, I thought I'll introduce myself. I always seem to forget to do that, and I go straight to the point. Um, some of you may know me. My name is Teresa Almeida, and I am a real estate investor. My specialty is multifamily, small multifamily units. That's really my bread and butter. I love doing that. I love having, like working with tenants and providing a really great place to live in that is going to become their homes. I also work on flips. I got a taste of it a little while ago, and I really love seeing the transformation. It's just a different way of helping both the end user and even the neighborhoods, just by ensuring that the property becomes, that distressed property becomes a really beautiful home for a new family. Um, so that's a little bit about me. I do like to advocate for both landlords and tenants, and I like to support other leaders that do it, that have already been doing this for quite a while. And like I said, if you know me from social media, fortunately, it seems that sometimes my name gets recognized, and that's a little bit funny, but there are also many landlords and many tenants that don't know the rights and obligations, and I think it is important that we all learn that, and ultimately this is a goal for all of us, and this is why you're here, because you want to learn and you want to be able to be a better rental housing provider, and that's really great. Grant, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Trace, thanks for having me. It's always enjoy speaking with different investor groups. I've been involved in real estate for well over a decade now, and started out with the land syndication. Ironically, it was actually the first deal that I did. And since then, I branched out into rentals and development and different types of loans, and moved on into other types of investing as well beyond real estate. But real estate definitely has always tugged at my heartstring. I've made a lot of money. I've wanted to rip my hair out. I'm sure like everybody has at different times, but you keep coming back to it because there's something about it that's really fulfilling. And frankly, I found the people around it to be, as Tracy and I talked about yesterday, have always been one of the greatest assets of this industry. Form groups like this where you can actually share and help each other learn and get better. And I mean, that was one of the ways I found myself to Landlord Credit Bureau. It's a common story among us as we come from real estate backgrounds. You were searching for a solution. We found Landlord Credit Bureau, and I met the CEO, who's a former corporate lawyer. He had joined the company about 2 years ago. He joined a former RCMP officer who spent 25 years in fraud investigation. And so they have been going through a revamp of the product for about the last year and a half, and we just relaunched in February. So if you're starting to see more of us now, it's because we've relaunched. We've got a few individuals like myself now that have come on board to enhance it. And so I spend my daytime working with landlords, and I spend my evenings looking for other ways that I can invest and make money in real estate in other ways. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. So I think we have most of the people who have signed up for the webinar. They have already logged in. So I think this is probably a great time to start. Again, everybody, feel free to turn on your cameras, and that way we can see your face as well. And it's not just Grant and me. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to send it through the chat. We'll make sure to address them throughout. But we're also going to be having a little bit of a Q&A at the end. I think that the meeting is booked for like about an hour and a half. That's probably more than what we need. We just wanted to make sure that if at the end you have a lot of questions, which some people have sent me questions. So if you feel that you still need to know a little bit more, or you want more concrete examples, or you need any type of information, just feel free to continue to stay. And then if we need to take a little bit more than an hour, then we have booked about an hour and a half in total. But I think within the hour, it's probably going to be, it's going to be good. So Grant, I'll leave it to you. Feel free to start and show us like the good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Well, before I jump into the application, I'll maybe just talk a bit about what Landlord Credit Bureau is. I'm sure there's varying levels of knowledge here. So Landlord Credit Bureau was really designed to bring accountability and transparency to the rental industry. So we are a certified reporting agency, which means that we hold the same distinction as an Equifax or a TransUnion. We operate in both Canada and the US. And what we really specialize in is payment data. So for the first time in Canada, we actually allow landlords to report rent payments in a way that they actually show up as a trade line on that tenant's rental report, or their credit report, I'm sorry. So what a trade line means is that's actually the same as what you're going to see when you pull a credit report that you would get from a bank that would have a mortgage, a utility, a cell phone bill. And what that means is on a monthly basis, the amount that's actually been paid or the debt that's owed is going to have a positive or negative impact on what that credit report shows. So this is a really powerful tool that landlords can use. And there's a ton of benefits for both the tenants as well as for the landlords that we'll get into. But I think understanding that credit line as far as the trade line with Equifax, like you're actually getting the benefit of reporting not just to us, but also with Equifax. So let's break that down a little bit. So when you report to us, we are a credit bureau. So we help collect that payment data. We allow you to leave reviews for tenants, which I'll be able to show you. So then that actually creates what we call a tenant resume. So anytime a landlord's now looking to screen for a tenant, they can actually search within the database. They can see all that rental specific information that we've collected on them, past reviews, there's objective questions, you can see that payment data. That's one aspect. And that really relates to that tenant's tenancy. So that can follow them wherever they go. The other side of the business is being able to secure that trade line. And that affects the credit outside of just tenancy. So that would affect their ability to get a car. It affects their ability to obtain a mortgage. And I had the pleasure of speaking with two different groups today that are actually running student housing. This becomes a really positive effect because you have young individuals that are coming up in the world. I remember what it's like when I started university. I could get a credit card for $300 and I had to make sure I was paid off every single month so I could, buy groceries and things like that. So this really helps them build up their credit. For as all of us have been in the real estate game, that 95+% of tenants are great. They pay on time. You want to help give them some additional rewards or incentives for remaining a responsible tenant. And this is one powerful tool that we're able to offer them. So that kind of helps explain both sides.
And if you don't mind, Grant, I just wanted to add, in my own personal experience, I have worked with, I have tenants that are students, they are new immigrants. I have had tenants that have had problems with their credit before, so their credit score may not be up there, but they're responsible, they're taking ownership on what has happened in the past. So it's also almost like not an amenity, but for the lack of a better word, almost like an amenity.
Oh, you went on mute, Teresa.
Sorry, I got muted somehow. So I'm not sure when I got muted, but what I'm saying is that for us to offer, it's also setting us apart from the rest of landlords, because it's almost like an amenity, for the lack of a better word. We having this offering to our tenants. So when you have a student or a new immigrant, and they also have so many choices in terms of rentals, and we see that right now in Toronto. My friend is looking for a place, and there are quite a few in the same building that are available. So now she has many choices. As a landlord, what am I offering to these tenants that is different? And this is good. This is a great feature. You're offering the ability of helping them build credit if that is what they need. If they're students, then they don't really have much credit because they're young. They're just starting into the workforce, or they're just joining, or they just arriving to the country. You're helping them, so that also sets ourselves apart from anybody, from other landlords.
Yeah, absolutely. Powerful marketing tool that you can use for sure. And the vast majority of the tenants that we have in our system are good. I think of myself in the past, I moved down to the States for several years. And when you cross borders, your credit doesn't go with you. Even though I'm employed, I have great credit in Canada, all of a sudden I find myself with no credit. So Landlord Credit Bureau helps in many aspects for that I could have gone to my potential future landlord and said, hey, I know I don't have credit in the US, but search the database with Landlord Credit Bureau. You'll see my past rental benefits. And now that as I'm getting reported through LCB, then of course it actually allows me to quickly build up that credit. So I don't have to pay for my cell phone when I get it, and you're able to have all these other benefits. So, I wanted to open with that because often what we talk about, it's new. People haven't really heard of it. There's a lot of legality questions around it, which I'll get into in a second, but I want to really frame it in that positive light because for the most thing, this is a great thing. It helps you create certainty in your cash flows. It makes sure that paying rent is top of mind for all those tenants. And it just helps them with that little boost every month, knowing like, all right, my largest expense is actually now going to my credit, which it never has in the past. Now, the flip side for all of us as landlords that we're worried about is, okay, like, what about those few tenants that aren't paying? I talk to people down in the US where you have eviction moratoriums that are all the way out into the new year. In Ontario, there's a long standing where it takes a long time to actually get somebody out if they have been delinquent on purpose, right? And I'm not talking about the person that's forgotten rent or, no, we're talking about the people that are actively not paying rent when there's debt that's owed to you. And with that, then our tool kind of flips to the side that gives you this powerful offering that you're actually able to make sure that rent stays top of mind. And that think of now the other side where you have this large debt that actually gets reported to Equifax on a monthly basis that has an impact to their credit. That's a lot of power. And what I'll say right now is we're not in the job of ruining people's credit. Like, we want to try and bring tenants and landlords together. We want to create that conversation. And even if there is a debt outstanding, right now we have a lot of landlords that put tenants on payment plans. And so even though they know that there's this level of debt that actually needs to get paid at some point in time, as long as the tenant's actually paying you on that monthly basis, the amount that you've agreed upon, then that's being reported as a positive. And so the tenant is truly seeing that benefit. We allow you to do this for both current and former tenants. So if you do have people that have moved out in the past year or two that still owe you funds, you can also report them on our platform as well.
That's great. And I may be jumping ahead, but I know that one of the questions that I've got is, how far back can we go? But the first question you already answered, can we go back to our previous tenants?
Yeah.
The next question is, how far back are we talking about? The last few months, the last year?
2 years is standard in this industry. Yeah. So what you do is you go back and say, okay, Grant owes me money from a year and a half ago or whatever. You just put in, I'll show you in the system. It's probably the easiest to see, but you just put in the lump sum, the total amount that's owed, and then you can adjust that on the monthly basis moving forward. So.
And how do you handle damages? I hear a lot from landlords where they may have paid their rent, but when they left, they leave a lot of garbage, and then the landlords have to end up spending hundreds or thousands of dollars to clean up. Other ones spend a lot more on renovating because they have significant damage has been done. Is this something that, can we report that as well?
It's a great question. What we tend to hold people to is what's in the lease. And the reason we're a two-sided platform. So we are not a blacklist. We report both good and bad behavior. We also have a tenant side of our business. So tenants can log in and create profiles, and they have to verify their identity just like a landlord does. And so if they dispute a rent payment, to say, oh, I actually paid you $2,500, then we get in the middle and mediate that. And so what we hold people to is what's actually held in the lease. So that's usually rent payments and usually utilities. The one exception to that is if you have a monetary order. So we do have individuals that will report damages that they have a monetary order. Otherwise, I'll show you there's a section where you can input the estimated damages to the property. So future landlords would be able to see that, but that doesn't actually impact their credit.
Oh, okay, that's really great to know, because one of the reasons that I really like this tool is because I think if we all start using it, in the future, if I want to have a tenant, I can just get the report and find out what did this tenant do in the past. Like, what is this applicant somebody that I will want in my property? Mm-hmm. And even just knowing that there has been a report of damages, it gives me an indication of what to expect in the future.
Yeah. Teresa, I'll maybe talk about the legality here, but do you mind giving me permission to screen share so sure. I can pull up? So probably the number one question I field is this legal? And the answer is yes. I mentioned that we're founded by a former RCMP officer from fraud and a corporate lawyer for a reason. There is a lot that goes in being able to make this happen. And we are governed by the laws of PIPEDA, especially here in Ontario. That's the privacy commissioner. We are in constant contact with her as well. And in PIPEDA, there's a section in, I'm sorry, I keep freezing, so I'm not sure if people can hear me. Teresa, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry, everything was freezing. So maybe step back. So we're governed by the laws of PIPEDA. So in PIPEDA, there's section 7, which allows you to report to credit bureaus, which we are, if there's a breach in contract, if there's a debt that's owed, or if you're trying to prevent fraud. So if you think through rental payments, like someone that actually owes you funds is clearly covered under those clauses, and that's been confirmed by privacy commissioners across Canada. So we do try and bring this transparency. So for most people, we try and look at your great tenants. You maybe don't want to rock the boat in some instances. And so that's why we provide you with some clauses that you can put in your leases, which Teresa talked about initially off. So any future tenants, you actually have that written consent where you are able to have this conversation before they move in. When they're reading through your application or reading through your lease, and there's this section that talks about reporting rental payments to reporting agencies, then you say, yes, this is something I do. It's a great benefit for you. It'll help you build credit. And if they're going to be one of these professional tenants that's just trying to abuse the system, they're not going to rent from you. So right away, that really helps increase your likelihood of getting paid in the future. For those great tenants, they realize that, and our initial communication with them is all positive, talking about those benefits. So it really helps create that area of trust. We're talking now for the current tenants or former tenants that you don't have this clause, that's where we're covered by PIPEDA, where you're able to actually report that payment. But we do encourage you to communicate, especially with those good payments, that, hey, this is something we're offering for you. We can provide some verbiage for those as far as welcome emails and things to really highlight that this is something that you as a landlord or a property manager are providing for them. And you're covering the cost to try and help benefit them. So I hope that covers it.
Good. Grant, I made you host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Still can't at this point in time. Hey, while we're doing that, is there any questions from the group at this point in time?
Let me double check the chat.
All right, well, that's going. I'll keep talking
Okay.
as we keep going through. I'm still getting the host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Oh, that's okay. I'll keep trying. If you don't mind, just keep walking us through it, and
Sure.
I'll work at that.
Sure.
I actually have a question.
Yeah, please.
So I'm not a landlord. I'm actually a tenant.
Awesome.
And my question is, if my current landlord, I've been in my current place for about 4 years. If my landlord hasn't been reporting my payment history, is that something that I should approach them about? Is that something that I can help facilitate from my side, as it would actually benefit my credit looking for a new place to live?
Right. So I'm glad we have some tenants on here. That's always helps round out the conversation. We don't right now have the option for you to pay and facilitate that on your own. But what we do is if you actually go to our website and you sign in as a tenant, you have the option of actually entering in your landlord's email address, and we can reach out on behalf of you. Like, I mean, if you prefer, I can actually reach out for you as well. But what we encourage is, as a tenant, you bring your landlord to us, and then we can help inform them of what the platform offers and how it benefits them. And we have tenants that ask their landlords about this all the time. So that's how we facilitate it at this time.
Okay, perfect. So it's just going to the website then and making the connection?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, there's a quick form that you can fill out, and it automatically sends your landlord an email. You find sometimes you can follow up there as well, or just send them the link, but that's how we do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any luck, Grant? It did ask me to confirm that if I wanted to make
it.
It did? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right. That should be showing for everybody now.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the website that you'll see when you log in within the application. So a couple things to note. We have a few different types of individuals here. I'm sure some of you have different organizations. Some of you might be private. So when you create an account, you have to put in your personal information. There is some things where it asks for either a birth date. You can optionally input your SIN number. It's not required, but what we're doing there is we're validating the identity. We don't save that information. That goes to Equifax just so we know there's actually a human and we can verify the person that's actually inputting that. We ask the tenant to do the same thing, and think of this as actually helps us understand who's using the system, who input the data, so that if there is any disputes, it really allows us to go back and actually figure out what happened. And as you heard, this is a pretty powerful tool. So we don't want to just have people that are going in reporting false data. We really try and hold everybody to a high standard through it. And that's why there's a couple of those steps when we go through and create an account. if you are part of an organization, you'd still put in your personal information, but then you'd go through and you enter the company name. So company name, website, you can do that. Some people use an info or payments or support or whatever at their company name. And that's what would actually show up in all the communications with those tenants. So if you have multiple people that are working in your organization, then you can have multiple people that are actually all sitting under the same account. When we go to actually input tenants, this is what you're going to look at. So this is talking about all the tenants that I actually have created. I just created a few dummy ones here. So I have Janine here that every month I'd go in, and our default setting is that all your tenants stay the same and everybody pays on time. So it's almost an automated benefit that you're going to create for all these tenants. So let's say I have Mr. Garth Brooks here. He, September 10th today, he had initially gone in, I'd seen he had $500 owing. He's now paid me. Simple thing, I can just jump into this line item and say he has $0. It's now paid on time, and there we go. And here's where you also have the opportunity to toggle on and report to Equifax. So I'll get into some of the different plans here in a bit, but really we have a paid plan which allows you to report to Equifax, which is $20 a month for you plus 60 cents per active lease. So think of each of these as a lease. Even if you have 4 or 5 tenants that are on a given lease at a property, you can report all those together. The paid plan also allows you to send out things like welcome emails. It allows you to send out rental reminders and other communication coming from us. So if I jump now into one of these, what we call tenancy record, it allows you to select the property. If the property you haven't input it, you can just simply click on add property. You add your different details. You can add different suites. So if you're like Teresa and you have multi-complexes, you can add the different unit numbers here and easily go through. Those will be saved within the system. So you won't have to be retyping the properties. You can just find them, select the unit each time, and this, and go from there. You enter the monthly rent here just once. Obviously, if it changes, you can update that, but that's what will actually be reported. If you say that the balance owing is 0, that's what will be reported that they've been paying every single month. As far as tenant information, what we need for the tenant is we need a first name, we need a last name, and we need a date of birth. That's really just to verify the identity. The date of birth is only required if you're reporting to Equifax. As you can imagine, that's our way of making sure that the person is the right person that we want to report on. And we do need an email address. So I say an email address because it doesn't necessarily need to be the tenant's email. So we see this especially in former tenants that move away, they change their email, they owe you money, they don't respond. So if you don't actually have that, you would just input your own email address. And the way our tool works is we obviously like to communicate with them, but if we can't, then it's still going to actually have the impact on their credit. So we have individuals that will reach out because they've now seen this trade line, whether they've gone to apply for a car loan or something and see a trade line that says Landlord Credit Bureau, they reach out to us and we direct them directly to the landlord to say, hey, you have this outstanding debt. This is why you've been reported. You've either ignored or you haven't received our notifications, which is rare. Then that's how we kind of provide that communication. You'll notice here the emails as well, there's different notifications. So there's different samples here. Welcome email is the initial thing. We'll go out to the tenant 24 hours after they get registered on our site. We can send monthly rental reminders. We can send late payment warnings. And all these toggles are up to you. So you can decide what communication and how often we have with those tenants, as well as you can choose to be copied on all those emails. So we see some landlords that will choose to be copied. They'll print these off and actually deliver them to their tenants. And we find initially the most contention occurs with the welcome email. It's not contention, but it's just questions, right? And so we help field a lot of those initial questions of understanding what this platform is. And then if they're actually talking about payments, we don't take any commission on the rent or things that we help collect for you. You obviously get the benefit of that.
Grant, if you don't mind me just interrupting for a bit.
Not at all.
I saw a question actually earlier today in exactly about this, and we also had that conversation about the emails coming from the Landlord Credit Bureau when a tenant is late. Originally, before we spoke, I thought that's almost like the clearing war. If a tenant is late and I'm sending them to the bureau and they're getting an email, and that's I think by default our sort of our what we think is going to happen. But I remember you mentioned that it's really not experience that seems to be happening. It actually seems to be a little bit more positive, at least in terms of sort of like that mediation between landlord and tenant.
Yeah. I mean, you're right on all accounts. So our name evokes emotion, right? When you get something that say, oh, you're being reported to Landlord Credit Bureau, which is why we make those welcome emails very positive. So as long as you actually read and don't just look at, the initial title of your reporting, you actually realize, oh, this is a benefit. Okay, my landlord's providing this for me. You can read between the line for some of the downfalls of it if you're not paying your rent. But we keep that positive. If you're starting to get things like late payment warnings, that's when our name really helps to come into play, where it's like, okay, this isn't just my landlord asking me for money. Now I actually start to see some of the negative ramifications. And most of the stuff that I would see, I looked through all our customer service tickets, and I definitely field some calls as well, it's usually just a misunderstanding. They get someone to say, hey, I didn't sign up for this, I don't understand. It's just a clarification. We handle a brunt of that. But obviously as landlords, we provide you with some of the tools to help you have those conversations as well. And as long as you talk through it that, hey, this is a benefit for you, as long as you're paying on time, then it tends to go away.
And sorry, more questions. How on time, because it really depends on my reporting, right? So if I was to, let's say my tenant, it's always 1 day late, but really don't want to punish my tenant for 1 day late when everything else may be fine. I guess, is there like some sort of flexibility there in terms of the reporting? Do we want to go to the extreme or?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you go in here, let's say I have Janine's account, I might have logged in on the 2nd of September or the 3rd of September, however you want to do that. And I'd say, okay, there's $3,500 that's owed, right? The reason I've done that is because I wanted to trigger the late payment notice. So if this is an odd behavior for the individual, you may actually want to trigger it so then they have that communication. But you get to choose what happens there. Now, let's say she's actually gone in and she's in good standing. I can drop that to 0 and I can either go paid on time, or I can actually just put that it was paid late. And so if the other component I want to answer there is, like, we don't actually report to Equifax right away. So if you look at the month of September that they owe $3,500 that's owed, it's not as if the moment that you input that, it gets sent to Equifax. Your month's rent is going to get reported the following month. So the debt that's owed for September is going to get reported to Equifax in October. And the reason that we have that delay is we don't want to wreck tenants' credit. We really want to help drive that conversation, help bring landlords and tenants together to figure out a way that you can mediate and bring yourself into terms that actually make sense for both of you. And then you can choose what actually gets reported here. So you don't even, I talk to this people all the time that, tenants will pay me on the 3rd or the 5th every single month. It's always late, but they always pay me. You don't have to report it as late. You have the power for what shows up, and what it shows up here is what future landlords then will be able to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to finish this off, this is the other component that you get to fill out. So when you're looking at tenants and you're trying to build out that resume, here's where you get to kind of make them shine or tell more of the story beyond the payment. So was a tenant ever taken to a court or tribunal? Here's where you can put those damages that aren't on a monetary order. Again, keep in mind that this needs to be verified. So when you're going through this, like, a tenant is able to dispute this, and don't take that as like, oh, I don't want to use the Landlord Credit Bureau. It's just be honest, right? Think of it that what you're putting out there would be the same thing that you would actually take to the rental tenant board, or that you'd actually try and create a case here. So if they didn't cause you damage, you just didn't like them, you can't put in damage. Like, we'll make you change that. So the last part here is your ability to leave a review. And what I'd encourage everybody here is, again, don't write this when you're emotional. If you're really frustrated with someone, don't go in and fill this out. The only time when emotion is good is if you had a great experience with a tenant, go in and report that here. So you can help that person secure that next place, especially in a competitive market like the GTA. any questions on this tenant resume, the tenant record, filling it out, some of the email communications that we've talked about?
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a paralegal and I do a lot of tribunal matters.
Okay.
So my question is, once I get my order, can I report it here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
And then you will report it to Equifax, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Do you need a copy of that order?
No, we don't. But if there's ever a dispute, then you're responsible for providing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds really good.
Yeah. Same thing with the leases. So we don't have you upload every single lease. When you log in, you verify that, okay, that I'm only reporting truthful information. And so if we find that something is false, we remove it.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm the tenant
Yes.
asking these questions. How would I know if I did have a profile for within the system as a tenant? And if there was something on that profile that I didn't agree with and I had verification of, how would I go about making it, getting things changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the welcome email communications that we send to you, there's a link that you would click and log in, and it would send you directly to your profile that you have. And so you'd be able to, basically you'd be able to see this information of what the payment has been reported on you. So if there is something that's out of whack, then you'd be able to see that, and typically you reach out to us first, and there's a process that we go through on any of those disputes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a landlord myself, and I was just looking just to verify something. When it comes to the status that month for owing or paid on time, if I put down, let's say, owing, and then I change it to paid late,
Yep.
If I change the paid late to on time before the end of the month, then that will not be considered as a late payment. Is that how it works? Like a 30-day kind of
Correct.
grace period?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So if you want it to stay on the record, you can leave the balance being at 0. So I'll just show you what I'm talking about. You just go paid late, and then you can save that.
Gotcha.
And
Okay,
so
cool.
that would be what shows up.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll actually go through a form of tenant. So when you're talking about the monetary order, sorry, I didn't get the name, paralegal. So if you do have that, then you can actually put in the total amount owed. So we typically see that with former tenants, where, I mean, it can happen with current tenants as well, but then you just put in that total order that you have here in that balance. So this doesn't just have to be, the 1 month rent or whatever. This is the total amount that a former tenant would owe you money.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Grant,
Armin.
on the same note about the tenant not paying, we don't really need to wait for an order from the landlord and tenant board, right? So if
That's
I have
correct.
a tenant that did not pay for however many months, and even if it's not now my tenant, I can already report them now, even
Absolutely.
if we don't have a hearing yet.
We always say start with us. And you have tenants obviously that owe you money, and that's a really unfortunate position to be in, and we want to help you with that. Whereas I think our product is really unique in the standpoint that we actually really reduce late payments as well as delinquencies. So by using our platform, it prevents you from actually being in those spots where you're having tenants that actually owe you a debt. Obviously not 100%, but we've seen it's typically by over a third, and the late payments tend to go down even more, which is great. It's just driving that communication and kind of bringing that accountability that we like.
This may be like a little bit of a loaded question, but have you your colleagues or the bureau in general, have you encountered like a lot of opposition from tenants? Have they come and be like, like open about they don't want this service because they know that it's going to affect them. Whether, you know, if it is negative, they're going to not really like that. It's been years of not having any sort of any consequences of choosing not to pay rent. Have you guys have any, you know, any flashback from tenants or any other organizations?
Yeah, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'll say it's maybe a 2% of tenants that initially, when we send it out, they'll reach out to us and they have questions. And typically when you clarify it, it's like that 2 to 5% of people, like they want to know, okay, what's going on? I didn't sign up for this. Like, I haven't heard of this before. But most of the time it's that communication. The number of tenants that we actually get that are really angry and try and bring it is really minimal, because the reality is they owe somebody money. So they don't really have a whole lot to say at that point in time. Like, we definitely try and help them. We're always looking for ways that we can actually help support tenants to get on payment plans. We're exploring different partnerships that would facilitate tenants helping get back on their feet if they are really in dire circumstances. But like in most of those situations where you have a tenant that reaches out to us, they hate our service, they hate the fact that they have to pay rent, like there's not a whole lot we can do for them. And sometimes they create a lot of noise, but the reality is their credit will continue to be impacted until they rectify the situation.
Thank you.
Sorry, is there
As landlords, you're not alone. Like you have our support. So if people do come forward and they're disputing, it's like we can help investigate. We can help deal with a lot of that. You don't need to feel like this is all on you.
Is this service annually charged or monthly?
Yeah, it's a monthly charge of $19.99, and then it's 60 cents per active lease. So a lease is one of these line items here. So you can have multiple tenants on a lease, but it is charged at 60 cents per month for each of those leases. We are also launching a couple new features here at the end of the month. So I mentioned one of them already, of being able to search our database. You'd be able to search Janine and see this is her payment history with us. So that will be able to be a feature here at the end of the month. As well as the ability to run credit checks. So traditional Equifax credit reports.
Right.
So Grant, on this screen, we see the date. Is it allowing us to enter date, or it's just a month that we can enter?
It is just a month.
I have a question. You may have said this before. I'm sorry, I might have missed it. Do you have clauses that we can add to a lease that indicates that we are utilizing this service?
Yes,
and
we do.
You can expect a welcome email from them.
Yep,
et cetera,
absolutely.
et cetera.
So if you go down into our resources section, and I've even sent these to Teresa, so if you want to distribute them, Teresa, you can do that as well. But if you go in our application under resources, we have a bunch of things for you as landlords. So this is the application and lease clauses that I'd recommend you start using. We also have a tenant notice for members. So sometimes landlords prefer to send some of the communication out themselves. So this is a PDF that you can write the body of the email and then attach this. And then here's another section that goes into the legal aspect of our business, talks about the specific clauses in Section 7 of PIPEDA, gives some examples of different regulations that have occurred, which kind of verify our business model, and then talks about the consent component as well. So those are readily available for you to download. There's also a couple, we highlight people on the product updates, and there is some guidelines and checklists. So our founder, he's always coming up with different ways to help landlords. He's been in this game for a long time. So there's a couple of things that you can go through here and as checklists if you find that valuable.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to add, I found the notice to tenants, I think that's what it's called, actually pretty self-explanatory, and I've been included it in my leases as part of the appendix. So it becomes an appendix C or D, whichever letter we add along with my lease. And when I sent to them, interesting enough, I haven't found anybody really questioning it, or like sometimes I get questions about different clauses in my lease, but when I started using it, and I just kind of threw it in there, and they have to read the entire thing and ask questions. I get asked questions about I may get asked questions about almost everything else, but nothing. It seems that has been pretty clear for my tenants, at least in my experience. They have not questioned it. They have not really said anything negative about that. And I think even when I was, I have a student, and actually the parents are the ones paying, so they signed the warranty agreement and all of that fun stuff. But I always like to walk them through the list as well, so that they know what they're responsible for. And I mentioned this to them, that their credit can get hit because of this as well. So they did not question it. They're just like, okay, that makes sense. We don't pay, it gets reported. So in general, it seems that at least at the beginning, good tenants don't seem to have an issue with that.
It's interesting because a lot of tenants, it depends on on your background, but like I've actually had a lot of tenants say like, oh yeah, I actually thought this already occurred. And then you have landlords that often will say like, oh, I've been waiting for this. Like this is an amazing thing. So it just depends on what your background is. Some people just kind of find it redundant that now you're telling them that their credit's been reported because they thought it occurred all along, even though it hasn't been able to. So
yes.
Any other questions?
Yes, Grant, I have one question. Suppose somebody report the former tenant. So how long you wait before you report to credit bureau?
Again, we wait that month.
And is there any specific date in a month that that is being considered to report to credit bureau?
I think about the middle of the month. There's not a specific day that we tend to push, but it's usually between the 15th and the 20th of every month.
Okay. And do you reach out to landlord about tenant being asking question to you, or how the landlord knows they have?
Yeah, so we try and shield you from some of the what I'll deem customer service questions. But if the tenant ever has questions relating to their landlord or they're trying to pay, then we always push them to talk to you and engage with you. We stay out of answering for you from those questions. We always drive the conversation back.
Okay, so you don't consider tenant request to not to report from their side, right? You just let them speak with the landlord first to do anything about that.
Sorry, could you?
If tenant complains that he don't want to be reported or she don't want to be reported because this is a wrong complaint or a wrong reporting, so you don't just immediately stop reporting. You just do whatever you need to do, and you just let the person talk with the landlord to whom they are owing the money. Is that right?
Right. So I see what you're saying. So it depends on who they contact first. So what I would say is sometimes the tenant will go directly to the landlord and say, hey, this is incorrect. I don't owe you money. At which point in time, then you would have that conversation. And if it is true, then...
regarding our conversation yesterday, when you say $60 an hour, do you mean in court or do you mean in the office?
I think Carmen may have unmuted herself. I'll send her a message.
Sure.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Question was regarding, sorry, I lost my train of thought here.
Hello? Oh, sorry, you cut out.
Somebody's on mute, that's why.
Yeah. I don't think she can hear us.
I'm
sending her a message.
It was brought to my attention by Blaine, actually, that I can't have you as a subcontractor.
As the host, can you just mute all?
The errors.
Sure. I think I just muted her.
Yeah, thanks.
AP, do you want to ask your question again? I'm sorry, I missed the last bit of it.
Oh, I can do it. I think he's probably muted right now. His question was about, I think mainly about the mediation process, I guess. Basically, he asked if the tenant was calling and telling you, no, there was a mistake, or no, do not report me, whether you will just stop reporting or what happens at that point.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Remember that. We, so what I was saying is it depends on where they go. So sometimes they'll reach out to the landlord initially and say, hey, this is incorrect, or I don't owe you money, in which case you obviously have the answer. And so you can inform them that, yes, this is correct. This is the amount that you owe. Sometimes the tenants will reach out to us and say, hey, this is, I'm not happy with this, or this is wrong. If it's just that I'm unhappy and I don't want to be reported, then we say, well, your tenant has the right to actually report payments. And this is a benefit as long as you are paid on time. If there's a dispute, then that's a different issue. So if they come to us and say, hey, this is the incorrect amount, I don't owe money, then that's when we would get involved and actually start to investigate what's going on. And then we tend to reach out to the landlord at that point in time and say, hey, one of your tenants is disputing this amount. Like, then we'd have a conversation or have you show the lease. And we typically put the first onus on the tenant to say, okay, like you said, you paid this month's rent, like, can you give us, a receipt or something that actually shows that that payment has gone through? And oftentimes that mediates, I'll say 90% of the disputes, because they either haven't paid and they're just looking for a way around it, or they have paid, and so then it's a real quick note to the landlord to say, hey, I think you need to go in and update your account, and they go through and do that.
So I would think, and I guess I ask this question, I guess for the benefit of the tenant. If I'm a tenant and like you said, I feel like there was a mistake, I bring you maybe my e-transfer notice that I sent it to the right email for the right amount.
Yep.
Or maybe I showed the deposit made at the bank, or whichever way, like a copy of the check that shows that it has been deposited in the landlord's account.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming that that's what you will take and as proof, right?
Yep, you got it.
So this is a little bit of an odd question, but I found it, and I don't know if because it has been a tough year for landlords and tenants, and one of the requirements when I had an opening this the last couple of months is that I requested proof of having paid rent this year. So not everybody would have been able to easily prove it if they had this report, very easy, but if not, it would have been e-transfers, checks, so on and so forth.
I think you muted again, Teresa.
To be honest, in my mind was, if you're all in cash, either you should show that you withdrew it from the bank, like the money is coming from somewhere, or it should be coming from somewhere. So there's gotta be even a little bit of a trail in terms of maybe like a text message saying, hey, I have the cash, are you coming at 8? Or something. Like, have you ever encountered those type of situations, or how do you envision those situations to be encountered?
I mean, cash is obviously a little bit more challenging. As you say, there's typically a trail. Like what I'll say is most of our disputes aren't that complicated. Like it's kind of we rarely get into a he said, she said, this sort of thing. Like there's trails in a vast majority of these situations that we can easily get to the bottom of.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's most of what I wanted to show tonight.
Can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. If you have one tenant and let's say they have a partner or spouse or somebody, would you register all of those, the name of the occupants, all of them, or just the tenant who pays the money and you have the agreement with?
So you have the right to put every name that's on the lease in our system. So when you pull up to add a tenant, you can add multiple tenants on a lease. You can also add someone that's a cosigner. So we see this.
The lease usually maybe have the tenant who paid, but there will be occupant who will be the same thing, they are partner in a crime, let's say, who will be kind of spouse or friend who live with them, or guest, or somebody who is kind of sub tenant. So
Yeah.
So they all together will be kind of, agreeing
So
to pay.
if they're not on the lease, you can't report them because you don't have a legal document that binds a payment between them and you. Now, that being said, if there's multiple parties that are living in a home and I'm the only person on your lease, you can report me with the credit bureau. And even if I've paid my component, but a bunch of my roommates haven't, you can still report that debt against you, because as the leaseholder, I'm responsible for covering the payment in its entirety. Does that make sense?
I didn't get it. Like, if you have the tenant who usually responsible to make the full payment.
Yeah.
But he's a friend live with him, and and he had his girlfriend live with him. So what do you do in this case when he doesn't pay, and the other two, they are on agreement with that? So basically all of them an agreement with that. So you're not getting their end.
Right. So if their name isn't on a lease, you can't do anything. Because they're not legally tied to you to actually owe you rent.
So only the tenant who pay you the money who will be reported.
Right. So it's only if you have a lease. So it can be multiple people that are on that lease, but it has to be the name that is on that lease. So given your situation, let's say I'm renting from you, my name is on the lease. I have my girlfriend and her brother that are living with me, they decide not to pay and we actually owe you money. Even if I've paid my section, you can still negatively impact my credit, which then would probably give me a strong desire to go back and make sure that they're paid in full. But you can't do anything to anybody that's not on a lease.
Yeah. If you don't have a lease or signed lease, you have verbal agreement, especially with this time, what do you do? Would you be able also still report that or no?
No. You need to have a signed lease. And I mean, this goes back to a lot of legal documentation here. We need to be able to have proof, and especially as things start to fall apart, we can't be looking at a he said, she said with any sort of verbal agreement. So they would have to be in writing.
But the Tenancy Act accepting verbal agreement. So like basically you're going now to the court. If there's no signed lease, then basically they shouldn't be the tenant, and you can have your place anytime you want in this case. But that's not the case, because the government and the court, they bound the landlord as responsible. Those are his tenants, even if there is verbal. So why you cannot do that in this case?
I mean, the challenge comes with if there's ever disputes, right? So maybe I'll just ask the question, are you talking about a specific situation, or is this hypothetical, or?
No, I'm talking about specific situation where you didn't sign the lease yet. And with the situation with COVID, like there were a lot of, issue. And when the tenant moved in March, then right away you have this lockdown and everything. So the lease was not signed yet. And the tenant, after 1 month, when they have the COVID, when there is all this come up that tenant doesn't have to pay, they start to say, we don't have to pay. Right. So now where are you? Like now, how you consider this? Are they a tenant? You can report them in your system, or they are not tenant? Because in court now they are recognized as a tenant. When I called the court, I said I don't have even lease agreement with them. They say it doesn't matter. They are your tenant, and they can stay until you can have a hearing or something, and that's gonna take a year while there is not even a legal lease agreement.
Right.
I think that situation, it is very challenging, even as we go to the landlord and tenant board. When we don't have a lease, it just adds so much complication, unfortunately. I think to her point, I wonder if in lieu of an actual lease agreement, will you take some sort of documentation from the board? So let's say that I have a tenant and they did not pay rent. the landlord and tenant board will recognize that person, even though we don't have a signed lease. They will recognize them because we have a verbal contract, so it is recognized to have a verbal lease. If I provide them with the proper forms, in this case it will be an N4 because they did not pay me, and then I go to the landlord and tenant board and file an L1, not to get technical, to file, and I'm going to take them to the hearing. It may take me a whole bunch of months for that hearing, but will that be good for the bureau to say, oh, okay, so you don't have a lease, but because you have given them the proper forms, because you are requesting a hearing, would that be enough to take them?
Yeah.
We take this in lieu of the
Yeah, if there's the documentation, then that's okay. I mean, where it comes into an issue, and I thought this is where you were going with this, if it's all verbal and it hasn't gone anywhere, then that's a bit of a challenge.
Court already.
Yeah.
But there is also a receipt, let's say, you know, for payment at the deposit, like last month's, first month.
Right.
So those are actually also proof.
Then that would be fine. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And would you, the online, because for first 2-3 months, I had the online e-transfers. In my opinion, that consider already like documentation. So, but is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, in that sort of situation, you're starting to build a paper trail. If it's going to be recognized by the landlord tenant board, those sort of things, then yes, you'd be able to build a case for that. If there's no documentation, there's no paper trail, there's nothing, then that becomes.
There's a payment. There's a payment so the payment online. So there's a like official, you know, bank statement say that like you received the payment. So that to confirm you receive a rent payment.
Right.
You know, that from the person you are reporting, you know. With the e-transfer, usually you get the email from that person, and that proves that that person was sending you email for a couple of months or 3 months. So
I will think that
that should be
the
enough.
more documentation we have, we make your job a lot easier. The less documentation we have, as in anything, it just adds a level of complexity to the whole situation. Hopefully, we'll not get to the dispute part, but it's the more than we can build a case by having a trail. I think that's what you will expect, and will be actually helpful so that we don't have to take a reporting back.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add, I know you had a question about the occupants and whether we could report them. As Grant mentioned, if you have, for example, a couple in the list, if you have Grant and Grant has, well, I'm gonna make you a married man right now, and Grant has his wife, and they're both on the list, and they can have their 2 friends or however, or the many friends as occupants. Even in general, the rule of thumb as landlords is that we deal with the people that are leaseholders. You do not want to get involved too much with the occupants, because that's when things start to get messy. Then suddenly you don't have two tenants, you have 2, 3, 4, 5. So in general, you want to deal directly with the people who actually signed the lease, not necessarily all the people who maybe also be living in the unit. So,
Yeah.
and I would think that that's why we cannot hear the credit report, because the agreement for the occupants, also we call them guests of the tenant, it's their responsibility is to pay the actual tenant, not us. So for all we know as landlords, they may be paying the tenant, and then the tenant may be choosing not pay us. But we don't have a direct contact, so we wouldn't be able to really help them in terms of having either, you know, to show that they're always paying or to show that they're not paying at all. We will only be able to do it with the leaseholders.
Okay, the leaseholder and the person who signs the lease, because sometimes the occupant, you put them also on the lease. I usually put, like, I have a section with the occupant who is living there. So let's say if it's a wife, I will you know, include her name in the lease, even like, although she's not gonna, you know, her name not as like the person, the tenant, but she's occupant. So in the lease itself, there is a name there. And although she's not gonna sign, only her husband signs, so that basically still you can't include her.
Well, if
So-
she's on the lease, you can include her. So in this sort of instance, if they're actually part of that lease, like as in they're written in, so they are responsible for paying the rent, then yes, you can report them.
No, okay. The lease usually say who's the tenant name, and then would say who is occupant with the tenant.
Yeah.
Let's
So
say
occupants are not responsible for paying
Right.
rent.
okay, that's it. Okay, clear enough. Thank you.
I don't know if we heard this question earlier, but I saw in the chat, Cheryl had she's really looking forward to the search feature, and she wanted to know when it's going to be launched.
It'll be launched by the end of this month. So by the end of this month, we'll have kind of 3 new things that are actually coming out that are important. So one is that search feature of our database. The other is the ability to pull credit reports, as we traditionally think, from Equifax. And then the third component is we've got a new debt recovery system. So this one's going to be used for the former tenants. It's a bit of a revamp for what we're currently offering. And so what this is going to be, the ability is if you can turn this function on, then we'll send repeated and kind of escalating emails to those former tenants, trying to really increase the likelihood that you're actually getting paid. And it'll continue to report them to the credit bureaus, not just us, but also to Equifax until they pay in full. So instead of looking at kind of that monthly ongoing, you'll have to update it monthly just to make sure that that debt is accurate. But that's kind of the third main feature that will be coming live in somewhat new form here by the end of the month.
Grant, if what somebody does not have email or former tenant's email is not working, how you will communicate?
So in that case, at this point in time, the only way that we could communicate with them is if you have a mailing address and you can kind of print things off and send them to them that way. Otherwise, we don't have a way of communicating with them at this time.
So then if somebody activate that debt collection option, then it would be of no help because that tenant has disappeared without giving contact information. Is that right?
Well, I won't say it's of no help, but unfortunately it tends to take a little bit longer. So we had 2 weeks ago, we had 2 individuals call us. One was trying to get a cell phone and they had ignored all our communication and they weren't able to get a cell phone because of their trade line. We had another individual that was looking for a car loan and same sort of thing. So the line item on Equifax definitely will be felt by them or seen by them when they do go and pull that credit report. Or if a future landlord, if they're applying for a new place of residency and they search our database. So you are correct that we don't have that immediate impact where they say, oh, I'm being reported at this point in time. But at some point in time, when they do go and actually look in, then they will realize what happens in that point in time. We direct them to you to get paid.
Okay, so when we report to as a former tenant and that goes to their credit report, but again somebody activate that debt collection option, you said you will report again to credit bureau, so that will be more than once reporting to credit bureau for the same person?
No, it would be the same. So yeah.
Grant, may I ask you, I may have missed it, but in the Equifax report, does it show, so and so owes Teresa Almeida, not the amount, but like they show my name, or do they show the landlord credit bureau name?
Shows landlord credit bureau.
Oh, okay. And I ask because I know many of us, we like a little bit of our privacy. We don't want our names everywhere. And to be honest, the landlord credit bureau has a lot more weight than saying, well, this person owes so and so, and we don't know who that so and so is. It's having the landlord credit bureau, the line that shows up, it really like brings to light, hey,
Right.
they were not paying rent.
Totally. So if you think of a credit report, you have your visa, your mortgage, your car loan, or whatever it is, and so then the trade line would show landlord credit bureau. So as a landlord, when you're looking at that, you'd be able to say, okay, this is actually rent. If you actually went a different route of more of the traditional collections, and that goes out as a public notice. So very different from the trade line, where that would say, okay, there's debts owed by grants and collections that are in place for $5,000 or whatever that is. Whereas our trade line has that continual impact and uses our name And typically at that stage, if they haven't heard from us, going back to that previous comment, where they haven't received email communication, maybe they've just ignored them, then they tend to reach out to us and say, okay, I need to remedy this. And we'd be able to go in and say, okay, Grant, you're Teresa's former tenant. You need to contact her to get this taken care of. And so that's why we close the loop and actually bring them back to you.
I think that it was great that you gave the example of this person trying to get a phone, this other person trying to get a car loan. So that shows that it works. It has an impact, and they most likely will want to come back and pay just so that they can move on with their lives. This is going to follow them pretty much forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, not forever. It lasts for 6 years, both positive and negative. So the longer that you report, like especially for most tenants, like you're reporting on a monthly basis, it's just helping them build credit, build credit, build credit. Let's say someone actually, they paid you, you know, eventually that decreases on the negative impact that it would actually have. So when the account is paid in full, then it goes back and shows it's been paid in full. And that's how it ends up getting reported.
But would
So
you
after-
report every year? Let's say if somebody didn't pay you and still didn't pay you, would you report it always every year or just one time?
We report it as long as you update it. So as long as you're going in our system and updating, so if you don't touch something for, so if, let's say a former tenant, let's say someone who no longer lives with you that has moved out, you'd have to go in every month and update the amount that's owed to you. Whereas on a current tenant, again, it'll drop back to zero, but then we'll just keep reporting that positive impact. Whereas for a former tenant, when all of a sudden the debt becomes zero, we just report the account is closed, and we report that once, and then that stops the reporting.
Okay, but as long as they didn't pay you, you reported every month.
Correct.
You just updated every month that you didn't get paid.
Correct.
And this is within Ontario, like the person, or no, this is Canada and all Canada. Like if
Canada
they
and the
out
US.
of the province, their credit here can affect them, let's say in Quebec.
Yes, it can affect them in Quebec, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if you're asking this question as well, but like your credit tends to not cross borders. So if someone owes you money here in Canada, that would stay on their Canadian credit report, but when they move down to the US or move to different countries, then that wouldn't follow that.
Yeah.
Right.
But at least in Canada, like
Correct. Yeah.
running away completely.
Yeah. I saw a hand came up.
So just wanted to give everybody a heads up. We did schedule it for an hour and a half. We thought we may be done in 1 hour, but I know you guys still have a lot of questions, but we have a little, about 15 minutes to go. So feel free to keep, sending us your questions, and we'll try to address them within the 15 minutes that we have left. Are you okay, actually, Grant, to stay?
Yeah, I got time. Yep.
I was the one with my hand up. And I've got a question. If you have two people that co-sign on a lease and they're reported to, then their payments are reported to through the system.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a search on somebody, do you see it as joint, or is it the payment history of an individual that shows up for that period of time?
So you'd only be able to see the data that we have on that person, but it would be you'd be able to see that they have actually paid the total rent. So let's say you and I are living together, we both pay, like our total lease is for $2,000, then you'd just be able to see, okay, this person's actually paid that amount of money every single month, or that there's zero balance owed.
Right. So if you looked up the individual then, so if they looked up you versus me, would they see it joint, or would they see that you've paid $2,000?
No, you'd just see that there's zero balance owing every single month. And so as long as we're in good standing, then that goes forward. Let's say jointly we owe $500, like it actually would report $500 for both of our records. So you're responsible for the total amount of that lease. It doesn't divvy up that you owe $250, I owe $250. It would both show up that we've actually owed $250, or that we had a late payment that month. So that is joint, but what you actually get to see as a landlord, you're only able to view the tenant that you actually have consent to search their records, right? So it's same like pulling a credit report, like you'd only see their information, but it actually portray what you did jointly on that lease.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, more questions. So related to that and related to the question before about multiple people on the list. So at least in Ontario, as you said, we don't see how much every person is paying. We just know that every month as a landlord, I have to get an X amount of money. How they divide it, if one person pays everything, they do half and half. That's sort of their deal, right?
Right.
But if I, as a landlord, go and register Sue and Bob as my tenants, and Bob never pays, or Sue always pays, I guess it doesn't really, like, it affects positively to both of them or negatively to both of them, regardless of whether, one is paying their share and the other one isn't. It's a full amount or nothing. So, and everybody that signed the lease is equally responsible. So, okay.
Yeah. I see there's a question here on the side from Lisa about being for professionals and in the city. So yeah, being a small landlord, I mean, we cater to landlords of all sizes, right? So we have people that have one unit in rural Saskatchewan or rural Ontario. It doesn't really matter. Credit is one of those things that, there's the two sides of it. So as you're looking for tenants to move forward, as this becomes more and more prominent from the search function, there's kind of this network effect that as tenants are trying to obtain new tenancy, then this record is going to affect that ability either positively or negatively. And that's regardless of whether you're in a big city or a small city, but that obviously does require landlords to be filling this out, and it does require tenants to be, or future landlords to be searching off it. The credit is going to follow them regardless of where you live. So I know people say, I get this all the time, it's like, oh, my tenants don't care about credit. It's like, one day they will. Like, it may not be today, it may not be next month, but at some point in time, everybody needs credit. And it doesn't matter how much you make, it doesn't matter where you live, that chicken always comes home to roost. So there's, those are the two comments that I'll give. And Lisa, I hope I answered your question there. Feel free to cut off here if I didn't.
Well, I was very surprised, and I always forget that even to get the internet, we get a credit check. Yeah. Which it always kills me, but like if you want to go and get a new phone line or you want to buy something at Best Buy, so they do a credit check. And you're right. I think many of us think, well, our tenants, they don't care. They're not gonna buy a house. They're not gonna buy a car, but they don't have to buy something that big to have an impact. They just need a phone, which everybody needs anyways. And the moment they want to go and get that phone, or they want to go and set up that internet, that's when it's going to hit them, and they're going to have to do something about it. So it's something landlords we need to keep in mind that, okay, yes, they don't need to buy a house. They may not, we don't know, but they may not, we may not see them as someone who's going to go buy a house in 1 year or a car in the next year. But they do need the basic stuff and the credit, and for that basic stuff, something as basic as a phone, they require the credit check.
Yeah.
I see that Ken has a hand raised. Do you want to unmute yourself to ask your question, Ken?
Sure. Couple questions. First, regarding damages, those need to be, I guess, adjudicated at the landlord-tenant board before your company can kind of make that mark on the person's credit, correct?
For damages, yes.
Okay. Second question is, what type of verification process does there need to be for landlords to join your service?
Yeah, so you'll go through what's called an Equifax EID, which you can input a few different types of information depending on what you're kind of comfortable to give. It can be SIN, it can be birth date, first name, last name, obviously is required. And so you'll verify your identity. We don't house that information internally. And then once that's verified, then you're allowed to report the tenants to us that will actually get reported.
So in the case of a company, it would just have to be a person within that organization, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So every person that's actually going to be inputting data would have to verify their own identity. But then as an organization, you can create an org-wide. So, Grandpa Wash's Rentals, and I can invite as many of my employees to input data as I want. And so you'd sit under the umbrella, and the communication to the tenant would come other GB Rentals, but each person that's inputting it would verify their identity, and they, that wouldn't be shown to the tenants.
And one last quick question. With the monthly plan, does the does the late payment automatically get registered to or reported to Equifax at the end of the month, or does that have to be done manually?
So if you have the toggle switch that we report to Equifax, we'll just automatically send what you've input from the last month to Equifax. So you don't have to report to us and then report to Equifax. As long as you're reporting to us and you have Equifax turned on the premium plan, we handle all that reporting for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Brad, the previous question about the damages, if somebody has left in that scenario, the case does not go to the Landlord and Credit Bureau, it goes to a small claims code. Is that right? So you need something from that side?
Yeah, so if you get a monetary order, you get that from the tenant board, you can go to small claims. So if you do have an order for a dollar amount, you can input that with us. Right away when they move out, you can put unpaid rent. So unpaid rent, unpaid utilities, whatever is being held accountable to the lease, you don't have to wait for any orders to report that to us. Anything related to damages or other peripherals, then yes, you need an order.
And one another question, you mentioned that the credit line stays on the report for 6 years in the name of Landlord Credit Bureau. So after 6 years, probably in the 7th or 8th year, how the landlord can make sure that that credit line still continues? Does the landlord has to contact your team to do that, or what is the way?
Okay. Tell me if this is not what you mean, but so it would only last for 6 years after it stopped being reported. So if you think of your payment history in the past, like let's say a credit card or a loan that you had a decade ago is no longer showing up on your credit. It doesn't have that impact on an ongoing basis. But as long as you're updating it month on month on month, you could report on someone for 20 years, as long as it's being updated on a continual basis. Once that process is stopped, it'll only last for 6 years.
I'm considering the scenario for the former tenant for whom the reporting has been done only once about the unpaid payment. But after 6 years, if that credit line disappears from that person's credit report, how to make sure that it continues further with the Landlord Credit Bureau's name in their report?
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. So as reporting agencies, so we are a reporting agency, we only show data from the past 6 years. Right. And so what that means is the same accountability that Equifax holds their payment plans to. So if that person continues to owe you debt, you can keep actually reporting them. So, I mean, your example of actually only reporting once, you should only do that if they have paid you after, the 1 month of reporting them. If they still owe you money, then it's just continuing updated that they still owe you that debt, and that will continue to get reported, for years potentially.
But you don't have to report it every month. You can report it every 6 months, let's say, or no?
I mean, you can, but we'd encourage you to keep it up to date on a monthly basis.
Oh, okay.
The payment data should be accurate. As you've seen from the platform tonight, it doesn't take long to update because the default set that people pay on time and that everything is reported. Then, paid on time and all your tenants stay the same. It really doesn't take that long to go through and make sure that the balance owed is updated for those few tenants that owe you.
But you don't, you don't take, let's say, tenant. If you have an order 3 years ago and you didn't report them and now you want to report them, can you do that?
Because the debt's still owed to you.
Even if it's 4 or 5 years ago, or how?
Oh, sorry, I see that. So yeah, we report stuff from 2 years ago. So payment history from 2 years.
Okay, and yeah. Okay.
So if 2 years mark is crossed, then there is no way that the person can report, right?
I believe so, yes.
So time to check those orders. Hopefully we're not in that situation, but definitely check your orders and so that you can reach out to the Bureau and record it. Because once you record it, even if you record it on month 23, like month 23 or month 24, then you can, after that, it becomes active, right? And then you just continue reporting every month that the debt has not been paid.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're reaching the end of our webinar. I want to thank Grant so much for like walking us through the tool and answering all of our questions. Even after we talked a couple of times and I sort of used the application in the past, there were still a lot of questions. So this is really, really great. And I hope that it gave everybody who attended a good understanding of the benefits for both landlords and tenants, and why a tool like this it's really beneficial for both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for having me. And Teresa, feel free to provide my email as you post this, or other individuals. Happy to field any further questions or jump on a call to answer any outstanding things. I tried to get through a lot of the stuff that was in the chat, but if there is anything, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. And I will send everybody Grant's information so that you can reach out to him if you have further information. So if you want to start getting set up on the plan.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, guys.
Grant.
Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Happy landlording.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Grant.